There was never a judge above you. You were left alone on purpose. Responsibility was the test you refused to take. You begged the heavens for direction, but guidance was removed so choice could exist. Your history is not forgotten. It is edited until it feels harmless. Every comfort you protect is paid for with something you refuse to see. You replaced gods with systems, then called them neutral so you could kneel without shame.
In 1976, a former journalist and self-taught scholar of ancient languages named Zecharia Sitchin published a book called The 12th Planet that would become one of the most controversial texts in alternative archaeology. His claim was extraordinary. Ancient Sumerian texts described an advanced alien race called the Anunnaki who came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, genetically engineered modern humans as a slave species to mine gold, and were responsible for all the major leaps in human civilization. For nearly 5 decades, mainstream academia has dismissed Sitchin's translations as fundamentally wrong. They say the work contains mistranslations, misinterpretations, and fabrications that serious scholars of ancient Mesopotamian languages simply do not recognize in the actual texts. But here is what has changed. Recent archaeological discoveries, new translations of previously unknown texts, and advanced DNA analysis of ancient remains have revealed that while Sitchin's alien interpretation was wrong, he was pointing to something real, something that mainstream archaeology is only now beginning to acknowledge. The Anunnaki were real. They are mentioned in hundreds of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts spanning over 2,000 years. But they were not aliens. They were something potentially more interesting, an elite ruling class whose origins, knowledge, and seemingly sudden appearance in Mesopotamia around 3,800 BCE represents one of history's most profound mysteries. New evidence suggests these people possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, metallurgy, and agriculture that appeared seemingly fully formed in the archaeological record. Knowledge that should have required centuries of gradual development, but instead shows up suddenly in southern Mesopotamia with no clear evolutionary path. The question is not whether the Anunnaki were aliens. The question is, who were they really? Where did their knowledge come from? And why does their sudden appearance coincide with what archaeologists call the urban revolution, the mysterious transition from simple farming villages to sophisticated city-states in just a few centuries? Let us start with what the actual ancient texts say, because this is where Sitchin went wrong and where he stumbled onto genuine mysteries. The word Anunnaki appears throughout Mesopotamian literature. In Sumerian, it roughly translates to those who came from heaven to earth, or offspring of Anu, the sky god, in the Mesopotamian pantheon. In the texts, the Anunnaki are consistently described as powerful divine beings who ruled over humanity, made decisions about human fate, and possessed knowledge far exceeding normal humans. Sitchin interpreted those who came from heaven literally. He claimed the Sumerian word for heaven, an Anu, actually referred to a planet he called Nibiru, and that descriptions of the gods descending from heaven were accounts of alien visitors. Professional Assyriologists, scholars who actually read ancient Mesopotamian languages, universally reject these translations. Dr. Michael Heiser, who held a PhD in Hebrew Bible and Semitic languages, wrote extensively debunking Sitchin's work, pointing out that Sitchin regularly mistranslated words, ignored grammatical context, and invented meanings that do not exist in the actual languages. But here is what mainstream scholars do acknowledge. The Anunnaki texts describe a group of beings who possess knowledge that seems advanced for the period, who are consistently associated with specific technologies and skills, and whose arrival or appearance marks a dramatic shift in Mesopotamian civilization. The earliest references to the Anunnaki appear around 2600 BCE in texts from the Sumerian city of Shuruppak. But the stories they tell describe events from much earlier, from the time before the flood, when kingship descended from heaven and the first cities were established. These are not primitive myths. They are detailed accounts with specific names, genealogies, locations, and technical descriptions. The level of detail suggests they are based on actual historical memory, memories of real people and events, even if embellished and mythologized over centuries of retelling. In 2023, a team of archaeologists and linguists published findings that challenge conventional interpretations of these early texts. Using advanced computational linguistics to analyze thousands of cuneiform tablets, they identified patterns suggesting the Anunnaki were not originally conceived as gods at all, but as a distinct group of rulers who were later deified after their deaths or disappearance. The research, published in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies, notes that early references to the Anunnaki use language and grammatical structures typically reserved for human rulers, not divine beings. Only in later texts, from around 2000 BCE onward, do the Anunnaki become fully integrated into the mythological pantheon as supernatural entities. This suggests the Anunnaki might have been historical figures, a ruling elite who governed early Sumerian cities, whose legacy became mythologized over time until they transformed from human leaders into gods in cultural memory. If true, this raises an obvious question. Who were these people, and where did they come from? Here is where the archaeological evidence becomes intriguing and problematic for conventional narratives. Sumerian civilization appears suddenly in southern Mesopotamia around 3800 BCE. Before that time, the region was inhabited by simple farming communities with basic pottery, mud brick houses, and no writing, no cities, no complex social organization. Then, within just a few centuries, cities emerged with populations in the tens of thousands, monumental architecture including ziggurats and temples, sophisticated irrigation systems managing water across hundreds of square miles, the world's first writing system, advanced mathematics, including the base 60 number system we still use for time and angles, astronomical observations accurate enough to predict eclipses, and metallurgy producing bronze tools and weapons. This transition is so rapid and so complete that archaeologists call it the Uruk period revolution, a transformation from Neolithic villages to urban civilization in roughly 500 years. For comparison, the transition from Roman civilization to medieval European society took longer and involved less technological change. Where did all this knowledge come from? The conventional explanation is that it developed locally through gradual innovation that accelerated once certain critical developments, irrigation and surplus agriculture, allowed specialization and population concentration. But the archaeological record does not show gradual development. It shows sudden appearance. Writing, for example, does not emerge in primitive form and slowly improve. The earliest Sumerian cuneiform, from around 3200 BCE, is already sophisticated, a complete system with hundreds of signs representing both objects and sounds. There is no clear evolutionary path showing simpler proto-writing developing into the system we see. Similarly, Sumerian mathematics appears fully formed. The base 60 system, sexagesimal notation, place value concepts, and geometric knowledge all appear in the earliest mathematical texts, with no evidence of earlier, simpler systems being refined over time. The astronomical knowledge is even more puzzling. Early Sumerian texts demonstrate understanding of planetary motion, the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle, and accurate star catalogs. This knowledge requires centuries of careful observation and record-keeping, yet it appears in texts from the very beginning of Sumerian civilization, with no evidence of the observational work that should have preceded it. In 2019, researchers analyzing the Sumerian astronomical text, known as Mule APIN, used computer simulations to determine when the sky positions described in the text would have been accurate. Their conclusion: the observations recorded in MUL APN correspond to the sky as it appeared around 3000 BCE, but the level of accuracy and completeness suggests the knowledge was compiled from observations spanning at least 1000 to 2000 years. If Sumerian civilization only began around 3800 BCE, where did observations going back to 5000 BCE or earlier come from? The study's authors suggest the knowledge was inherited from an earlier culture, but what culture? No civilization with the necessary astronomical sophistication is known to have existed in Mesopotamia before the Sumerians. This is the knowledge problem that the Anunnaki texts might actually be addressing. The Sumerians themselves claimed their knowledge came from the Anunnaki, the divine rulers who brought civilization to humanity. If we strip away the supernatural elements and treat this as historical memory, it suggests that early Sumerian elites possessed inherited knowledge from an earlier tradition. Recent genetic studies have added an unexpected dimension to this mystery. In 2022, a comprehensive DNA analysis of skeletal remains from early Sumerian sites revealed something surprising. The population was not genetically homogeneous. The majority showed genetic signatures consistent with local Mesopotamian populations that had inhabited the region for thousands of years. But a small percentage, particularly remains from elite burials in temple and palace contexts, showed different genetic markers suggesting ancestry from distant regions. The study, published in Nature Communications, found genetic contributions from populations originating in the Caucasus Mountains, the Iranian Plateau, and possibly the Indus Valley region. These were not the result of gradual migration and mixing. They appeared suddenly in the archaeological record at the beginning of the Uruk period. The researchers were cautious about interpretation, noting that elite populations often show different genetic makeup due to long-distance marriage alliances and the attraction of talented individuals from distant regions. But the pattern is consistent with a scenario where a relatively small group of people with diverse origins, possibly possessing specialized knowledge, arrived in or rose to prominence in southern Mesopotamia and established the ruling class of early Sumerian cities. This raises questions about the role of elite newcomers. Could these genetically distinct elites be the historical basis for the Anunnaki, a group of rulers with foreign origins and specialized knowledge who established themselves as the dominant class in early Sumerian society? This idea would explain several persistent mysteries about Sumerian civilization. First, the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge without clear local development. If the ruling class brought knowledge from other regions or inherited it from earlier traditions, this would explain why Sumerian civilization seems to begin at an already advanced level. Second, the consistent claim in Sumerian texts that kingship and civilization descended from heaven or came from abroad. This could be a historical memory of foreign rulers establishing dominance, and it helps explain why kingship is described as coming from elsewhere. Third, the emphasis in early texts on a distinction between the Anunnaki and ordinary humans. Later, mythology portrays this as a divine and human divide, but it might originally have reflected an ethnic or class difference between a foreign ruling elite and the local subject population. Fourth, the association of specific Anunnaki with specific cities and technologies. Enki is linked to Eridu and associated with wisdom, water management, and technology. Inanna is linked to Uruk and associated with warfare and political power. This pattern suggests real historical figures who ruled specific cities and were known for particular skills or achievements. In 2024, excavations at Tel Brak in northern Mesopotamia uncovered a temple complex dating to approximately 3,800 BCE, exactly the beginning of the Uruk period. The temple contained artifacts that challenge conventional understanding of early Mesopotamian society. The artifacts include a copper scepter with astronomical symbols that would not become common until centuries later, clay tablets with proto-cuneiform writing that predates the earliest known Sumerian writing by several generations, and most surprisingly, a stone carving depicting what appears to be a coronation or investiture ceremony with inscriptions identifying the figures as those who brought the Me. The Me, pronounced Me, is a Sumerian concept referring to the divine powers or attributes of civilization, the fundamental principles and technologies that make civilized life possible. In mythology, the Me were possessed by the gods, particularly Enki, and were given to humanity to enable the development of cities, kingship, arts, and crafts. The Tel Brak inscription is the earliest known reference to the Me concept, and it depicts the Me not as abstract divine principles, but as